Hey everyone, welcome to Exercise Check. In this one, we're going to be going over control flow and collections, which is in 3.7 of our reading. Let's dive into this. So starting out this exercise, we see we need to work on the exercises in IntelliJ Java Web Dev Exercises project, creating a new class for each item. We know from our last exercise, we already have a Web Dev Exercises project in our IntelliJ. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. I open up IntelliJ, open our import, and press open. And we're back. Great. You may call these classes whatever you like, but remember to use them with proper Java naming conventions. All right, I'll keep that in mind. 3.71, array practice. Create and initialize an array with the following values in a single line. From our reading, I know how to do this. But before I can do anything, I need an area to place my code. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new class first. So I'm going to go to exercises. But in this one, I'm going to go ahead and create a new package that's able to separate our past exercises from this one. And I'm going to call it exercises.ch3 or chapter 3. And we see that this package was created inside the exercises package. So I right click on ch3, I press new, and then Java class. And in here, we have to deal with arrays. I'm going to create my class called array practice. And great, we've created our array practice class. So going back to our assignment, it says that we need to initialize that array. And then what are we going to do with that array? It says we need to loop through the array and then print out each value, then modify the loop to only print the odd numbers. These two steps are telling me, okay, I need to create an array and then I'm going to do something with it, which sounds like print out all the odd numbers. So let's go back to our class, initialize that array and then loop through it. I need an area to place this code at. I can't directly do it in the class, so I need to create a method. Therefore, I'm going to create the print odd numbers method, which is going to be public. It's not going to return anything. And right now it's not going to take in any parameters. That first step said we need to initialize an array. Going over to our assignment, it says that we need to initialize an array of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8. I'm going to copy this over. These are the numbers I need to create an array of. So 1, 2, 3, 5, those don't have decimals in them. They're whole numbers. When they're whole numbers, no decimals, I know that these are integers. It needs to be an array, so therefore I'm going to create an array of integers. So I'm going to say int, open and close square bracket, my array of ints equals, and then we know exactly what the values of this array are going to be, so we can just directly initialize it. When we need to directly initialize an integer array or any array into the future, we do it by providing the curly brackets and then the numbers or whatever the data type is going to be inside of those curly brackets. So I'm going to paste exactly what our exercise said. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8. So there we go. My array of ints is now initialized to an integer array of size 6. So like I said, now I need to loop through the array, print out each value, then modify the loop to only print the odd numbers. So let's take that step by step. First, loop through the array and print out each value. We can do that. Let's create a for loop. We say for, and then we say int I to say it's an integer. I less than, and we need to have a stopping point, which at this point is going to be the length or however long my array of ints is. So we say my array of ints dot length, and then of course we always increment. Then it said to print out each value. To print out something to the screen, we use system.out.println. Then inside of here, we place what we want to print. It's at every single index of my array of ints. That's how we get the value. So we say my array of ints, bracket I. So there we go. We've created our method to print it out. So now we need to go ahead and test it. How we always do that is that we need to provide that starting point for this program. So we create our main. In here, we initialize a new instance of the array practice class. And then we call to the method that we want to run using that array practice variable. Perfect. Let's run it. And we see we get our individual values from that array on a different line, meaning we're printing them out properly to the terminal. All right, the next thing it said we need to do to this method is make sure it only prints out the odd numbers. So this one's a little bit more tricky. How are we only going to print the odd numbers? How do we know if a number is odd? We know a number is odd if it's not evenly divisible by 2. 3 cannot evenly be divided by 2. We get a remainder of 1. 5 cannot evenly be divisible by 2. We also get a remainder of 1 there. We know that if the number is not divisible by 2, then it is odd. Like we said, we can only tell if it's odd if we get a remainder back from the number. 5 divided by 2 produces a remainder of 1. We need to check for that remainder. So what is the thing in Java that helps us check for remainders? And the answer is modulus, that mod operator, or that percent sign. So we need to check for something. We need to check if a number is divisible by 2. So that sounds like we need an if statement. We need to make a decision. What are we going to be checking? My array of ints at the index of I. And now we say mod by 2, which means divided by 2 and get my remainder. So we get the remainder of 1. It is odd. So we print out that value of my array of ints at index I. So let's go ahead and try it out. We now see we're only getting back odd numbers within our terminal. This is exactly what we want to see. That means that mod is working properly. So let's move on. All right, so we're on to the third example. For this exercise, we need to use a string, and the string is provided, and use the split method to divide the string at each space and store the individual words in an array. So let's go ahead and do that. This is a different task, so I'm going to create a different method. I'm going to call it split a given string. I need that string, call it my provided string, and I'm going to copy it from our example. Perfect. So the next part says we need to use the split method to divide the string at each space and store the individual words in an array. So I heard we need to store the individual words into an array. Okay, that means that's going to be the variable that catches whatever comes back from that split method we're going to use. So I'm going to create that first. Said it was going to be an array of words. I know words are going to be strings. And we create an array by using that open and close square bracket. And now I'm going to call this variable my split strings. And then it says we needed to use that split method. How we use the split method is first we need to provide the string we're going to be splitting, which is my provided string. Then we call it that split method. Then split needs to know, okay, where do I need to actually split the string at? Do I need to split it at every time I see the letter A, every time I see a comma? We're like, no, every time you see a space, please. So I put in double quotes the space. So every time that split sees a space, it's going to divide that string up, and then at the very end, return everything that's divvied up into that string array called my split strings. Great, let's move on to the next step. Print the array of words to verify that your code works. The syntax is, and then it gives it to us below. All right, let's copy that. Okay, so I pasted it, but I see I'm getting 2 errors. I see arrays, which just means we have to import the class, so I'll import that. And then it says array name. Cannot resolve symbol array name. This is because array name, we never created a variable called array name, so it has no idea what we're talking about. The name of the array that we have within this method is actually called my split strings. So I'm going to replace array name with that. And there we go, now that error's gone. I want this to run again, so up here, I'm just gonna comment out this first one because we don't need to print out those odd numbers anymore. I'm gonna say array practice dot split a given string. And now I'm gonna run this. And we see that we get individual words back now in this array that we're printing out to the screen. So it did exactly what we expected. It split the string at every single space that it saw and then returned it back to us. Awesome. Okay, step 5 says repeat steps 3 and 4, but change the delimiter to split a string into separate sentences. Okay, we can do that. It sounds like we need to do exactly what we did on 3 and 4, so I'm going to copy the method that we created for 3 and 4 and paste it down here. But instead of naming it split a given string, I'm going to call it split a given string into sentences. We have that provided string, and now it said we have to change the delimiter. What it means by delimiter was that space that we placed in there. We need to change the space to something that can split it by sentences. Now in the English language, how do we know that a sentence has ended? The answer is a period. So that means we need to change this delimiter to a period. But one small thing about this, if we look on the left-hand side, it says regex. Regex is kind of a small language within itself that looks for expressions within strings. The weird thing about this is that a period means something to regex other than just being the character period. So we need to do something to tell regex, hey, this period is just what it looks like. Just completely ignore what you think it is and just let it be a period character. When we wanted to do that, we put 2 backslashes into the quotes. So let's go ahead and try to run this. I'm going to comment out array practice again and type in our new method. Let's run this. Now we're seeing we're splitting our input into its individual sentences. Very neat. All right, let's continue. It looks like we have completed step 5. Awesome. So now we're on to 3.7.2, ArrayList practice. The first one says, write a static method to find the sum of all the even numbers in an array list. Well, before I do anything, what I want to do is that now that we're in a new practice, I want to go and create a new class. So I'm going to do that now. We're going to go back up here to CH3, chapter 3, new Java class, and type in ArrayList practice. Great, now that we've created this class, let's go back. We know we have to create that static method to find all the sums of the even numbers in the array list. And then it says within main, create a list with at least 10 integers to call your method on the list. So though it gives us this first sentence first to write a method, what I want to do is I'm going to get main set up with that array list in there. That sounds more like the low-hanging fruit. So I create my main. So it says we need to create an array list. So we type in array list. And then it says that it needs to be an array list of integers. So we're going to type integer. And then I'm going to call it numbers to sum. And then I'm going to create a new array list of integer. There we go. We see we have to import array list. And perfect. Going back to our instructions, it says we need to create one with at least 10 integers into it. So that's what we'll do. One way we can do it is numbers to sum dot add, and then we provide an integer. In this case, I'm going to do 1. Save me some time. I'm going to copy this and then paste it. Then I'm going to put 2. We needed to do 10 integers, so I'm going to do this really quickly. There we go. 10 integers have been added into this numbers to sum array list. So like I said, this is one way to do it. But to do this, it took 11 lines to add all these numbers to our numbers to sum array list. Wouldn't it be nice that there was an easier way, kind of like what we did with array, and just initialize it all within one line? Well, there is. And what we can do is that inside of these parentheses of the array list, we can use a helper class called arrays. And then we call the method within it called asList. And then inside of here, we place the set of numbers that we want to initialize into our array list. So that's going to be 1 through 10. There we go. Now we're initializing our array list in a single line. So therefore, we don't need these other adds. All right, so the second half of our task is done. Now we need to go back to the first part, creating that method that sums all of the numbers if they're even. Another keyword here to point out is static. We need to create a static method. So let's do that. We'll say public static. In this one, I'm going to return the value from the method. That value is going to be an integer. So I'm going to say integer. And then I'm going to call it sum all even values. In our directions, it tells us that it needs to take in an array list of integers. I'm going to call the parameter values to sum. So if you're asking yourself, why did I not put a void here and I put an integer, and how did I know to do that? I got a quick hint saying write a static method to find the sum. Find the sum tells me that it is looking more to find that sum and return it from the method. If it wanted us to print out the sum and not return anything, it would have been more descriptive to say print out the sum or things along those lines. So that's what I read into there. So that's why I'm going to return something from this method. So first things first, we're just going to loop through this array list and print out each value to the screen. How we can do that is for int I, we started out just like normal, I less than, and of course we have to loop to the length of the array list. But an array list, which is values to sum, but in an array list, we don't have a length method to help us here. Instead, we need something else to tell us the size of it, which is size. So with array list, we use dot size. Then we do I++. System.out.println, and then we're going to get the value at each index and print it out to the screen. So we say values to sum, the array list we want to get the values out of. And to get a value out of an array list, we use the .get method. And inside of it goes the index we want to get, which is I. Finally, we see a red line down here. It's saying we're missing that return statement, which is true because we promised it an integer, but we don't have an integer just yet for it to return. So I'm going to just lie down here and say return 0. There we go. It stopped complaining. One last thing we need to do before we run this is that we need to call to the method. Now this method, again, is static. When we need to call to a static method within the class, we have to call to it directly from the class name, not from the instance. So to call directly from the class, we use the class name, ArrayList practice, dot sum all even numbers. It's complaining here because we have not plugged in an argument. So we say numbers to sum, and perfect. I'm going to click here, click run, and now we see we get 1 through 10 printed out into our terminal. Fantastic. Let's move on to the next part of the task. We need to check if the value that's going through our loop is even. Now, how do we do that? Well, just like in our array practice, we checked if a number was odd. We checked if a number was odd if, when we divided by 2, it produced a remainder of 1. So if we divide 4 by 2, which are both even numbers, we get a remainder of 0. So instead of checking if it's a remainder of 1, when it's odd, I'm going to check if it's a remainder of 0, therefore saying it is even. So I'm going to use this exact if statement, and in here I'm going to plug in the value I actually need to check, which is going to be, again, values to sum dot get I. So then we have to replace 1 with 0, and now it's checking if it's even. But let's double check. Perfect. Now we're getting back 2, 4, 6, etc. All those even values. All right, last step. We need to get the sum of all of these numbers. Now remember, in a for loop, as it loops through, every time it goes back to the top, it forgets whatever's within itself. But the sum is something we need to remember. We need to remember 2, then 2 plus 4, then whatever that value is plus 6, and so forth. We need to remember this value as it continues to loop. When we want something like that, we have to create a variable outside of the for loop so it remembers. Now, when we create this variable, we need to make sure it's the correct type. Everything we've been working with in here has been an integer. So we're going to put integer. I'm going to call it sum. And I'm going to initialize it to 0. Because what if our array list had no even numbers in it? Technically, our sum then would be 0. Now we're going to replace the system.out and sum these numbers. So I'm going to say sum equals sum plus values to sum dot get I. Because we grab that value, we add it to whatever sum was before, and we reassign sum to that new value. Another way you could have done it is sum plus equals values to sum dot get I. Perfect. Now that we have something that's creating a sum to return from this method, let's go revisit this return statement here. We don't want to return 0 anymore. We want to actually return that sum. So I'll place sum here. Fantastic. We come back up here, and now this is actually returning something useful to us. So let's capture it and save it into a variable. I'm going to say integer, the sum. And now I actually want to print it out to the screen. So we'll say system out.println, the sum is colon plus the sum dot toString. And let's run this. And now we get the sum is exactly what we want to see here. Let's move on. The next thing we have to do is write a static method to print out each word in a list that has exactly 5 letters. So we can do this. Let's go back to our code. And it says to create another static method. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll say public static. In this one, it says print out. So I'm not going to return anything. Therefore, I'm going to say void. I'm going to call this print words with 5 letters. It'll need to take in an array list of words. In this case, words are strings. So I'm going to put string. And the parameter's name is going to be words. Great, I've created this method. So what I'm going to do real quick is that I'm going to loop through it and again just print out our values to the screen. We use size because it's an array list, I++, then system.out to print. Okay, we come back up here and I'm going to send a comment these out since we no longer need them. We're on to our next step. All right, let's make another array list. I'm going to be lazy and just copy what we had up here previously. Come down here, change integer to string, and then in here, I'm going to paste 3 different words. Coolio. Now we have our words, so I'm going to rename this variable to words to search. That looks nice. And now we need to call to the method. Again, this method is static, so we need to call to the ArrayList practice class directly to call to this method. And then we pass in words to search here. Let's run this. Awesome. printing dog, horse, and cat to the screen. Let's move on to the next thing. We need to check if this word has 5 letters in it or 5 characters. Now, it's telling us we need to make a decision. We need to check for something. Therefore, that's indicating to me we need to make an if statement. Next, we have to work with the word. So let's get the word out of the array list. We use get and the index we want to work with. Now we have the word to work with, that individual string. Now we need to check if it has 5 characters in it. So how we can do that is we use the .length helper method. This will get us back the length of that string that we're looking at. And we ask it to compare it to 5. Is the length 5? If it is, print it out to the screen. Now let's go ahead and try to run this. Now we see we're only getting back horse after we ran it. And there we go. We have now created a method, looks and sees if a word is 5 and prints it out to the screen. Let's go back and make sure that's all it wants. Perfect. Modify your code to prompt a user to enter the word length they want to search for. Okay, so I see prompt the user. So I know I'm going to be using that scanner class. And they want us to enter in a word length. So we're going to be looking for a user's input that's going to be an integer. So let's create a method for that. I'm going to create a new public static method because that's what we've been working with in this entire practice. And it's going to get back a user's input, which is going to be an integer. So therefore, this method is going to return an integer. I'm going to call it getUserSearchInput. It's not going to take in any parameters from what I see. And like we said, we're going to use that scanner. So we say scanner equals new scanner, take in system.in scanner.next int. There we go. We ask the user for the int. Now we have to save it into something. So we say integer, my user's int. Then we have to close the scanner, and then we return whatever the user inputted, which is in my user's int. All right, now let's use this. Let's go back up to the top and modify our code like this task asks. We already have our words to search. We don't need to change anything there. Down here is where it does the search. So I know that this is preparing the words to search, and this is where it's actually doing the search. Therefore, I need to ask for my user's input between the two, because I can't search these words until the user gives me some input of what length to search. So I need to capture that input, which will be an integer. I'll call it search length, and then I'm going to call to that method using the ArrayList practice class directly. So one last thing I'm going to include here is just the question to ask the user before they're prompted. So I'm going to just put a system.out up here. And I'm going to ask them, what word length are you looking for? All right, so let's go ahead and try this. So I said I wanted 3, but I still got back horse. So what are we forgetting? Well, we haven't hooked up search length to this print words with 5 letters. So that means this method still has no idea what my user inputted. So that means I have to let it know what my user said to search. So I'm going to add another parameter. I'm going to call it search length. Now I have this extra parameter in there to share data. So we get this red line up here. So I'm just going to include that search length up here so it stops complaining. Perfect. Now we're passing what the user input into our method, and then it's being passed into this. So one last thing we need to do, we're still hard coding this 5 here. So we'll always be searching for a length of 5, but we want to search for what the user provided. Again, that user provided information is in this parameter. So I'm going to change 5 into that parameter, search length. Let's try to run this again. Type 3. Now we get back dog and cat. Perfect, because dog and cat both have 3 letters or characters inside of them. Now we have this working. Let's move on. Bonus. So it looks like instead of creating our own list of words, what they want us to do is get that string from the array practice section. So we have to get back all those words that we are splitting that big string into, and we're going to use that now as our words inside of this practice. Interesting. So let's do that. Let's go back to array practice. Let's find the method that we are using to split that string into words. This one was splitting into sentences, but this one splits by spaces. So this one was splitting it into words. Therefore, I'm going to use this one. So I need to get all those words that it splits it into from here into my ArrayList practice. Well, if I want to get back all those words, which again is in this mySplitStrings variable, I need to return them or spit them out of this method. But I'm not returning anything because I have void here. So I need to change this. I need to change it to whatever my words are being stored in, which was a string array. So I change void to a string array. Now I'm getting a complaint because I have no return type. So I say return my split strings. So now it's returning this. And I'm going to comment out our system out just because I don't want it to be printing that while we're trying to run this new program. So now we have this method in here giving us back those words from this string. Okay, so now we're in here, but how are we going to get those words back? Well, we'll have to ask ArrayPractice to give us those words. So therefore we have to create a new instance of the ArrayPractice class. So let's quickly double check something. In ArrayPractice, this method that we just looked at is not static. If it's not static, we can't directly access it from the class. We have to create a new instance. So we will come back up here to ArrayList Practice and create a new instance of ArrayPractice. Now here we can use all the public methods of ArrayPractice to do something. I said I needed to get that ArrayPractice split a given string method a call to get all those words back. It needs to return something, those words, so we have to create a variable to store them. So I'm going to call it returned words. So now we're getting back all those words into a string array. Now we still have a conundrum. Print words with 5 letters accepts an array list and an integer, not a string array. We can't pass a string array into something that's asking for an array list. So how can we get returned words to become an array list? Because I don't want to have to go and edit my method. So let's convert this returned words into an array list. And how we can do that is using that arrays as list helper method once more. Instead of saying dog, horse, and cat in here, what I can do is just paste that string array into there. This converts it into a list, which then initializes our array list with all those words that are returned back from that method. Don't believe me? Let's run it. I'm going to say 4 this time. And now we're getting back all the words that have 4 characters within them. If you're asking yourself, why does not come back even though not has 3 letters? That's because technically it has 4 characters within this string. We have the N, O, T, and then the comma. Same with box period. Awesome, congrats. That is it for the bonus. On to the HashMap practice. So we need to make a program that's similar to this gradebook HashMap that does the following. It takes in a student's name and ID numbers as integers instead of names and grades, and then 2 other things. But before we even get into that, let's just go ahead and create a class. I'm going to call it HashMap practice. And right off the bat, I'm just going to go ahead and make a main method because I know we're going to need that. Perfect. Okay, so we created our class, and now it says make a program similar to gradebook HashMap that does the following. So I'm going to go find this gradebook HashMap. It's over here in 3.6. We see our HashMap gradebook, and then we see that it has quite a bit of code inside of it. So let's take this step by step. It takes in students' names and IDs as integers instead of names and grades. Okay, so let's go over and just grab the hash map that I was creating originally. I paste it, I import the class, we'll go back to our assignment, and it says the keys should be IDs and the values should be names. The ID numbers as integers as well. So IDs are the keys and they're also integers. And I know in my hash map, the first thing in these pointy brackets is the key. So therefore I'm going to put integer here because these are going to be our students' IDs. The second thing it says we need is it takes in students' names. Names are words, aka strings. So I know that my value is going to be a string. I'm going to keep it named students, and we're going to move on. Modify the roster printing code accordingly. Okay, so that means we need the rest of that code now within this past example. So I'm going to copy the rest of it. I paste it, and we see we're getting back a few errors here. Let's first get down to business at the very top, scanner. We know nothing's wrong with scanner, it's just not imported. So there we go, it's imported. No errors, no errors. We start in this do while loop. Nothing too wrong here. Students.put new student in grade. So let's see what new student is. Let's trace where this is coming from. New student is a string, and it's being set down here by the scanner, and it's taking in the next line, which is also a string. And then it's being put into the students.put. The first parameter in a put I know is the key. So why is it red? Because it's putting in a string as our key, but our new key is an integer. Therefore, we need to change this new student variable to an integer. So now this line is angry because it's saying, oh, I need a string, not an integer. Well, you know what? I don't need a string. I need the next int. And now this corrects this error down here. Fantastic. What's wrong with you? New grade, where is that created? New grade is right here at this input.nextDouble. I know that new grade is in my value spot, and my value in this new hash map that we're creating is a string, aka the student's name. So I need, instead of new grade being a double, I need it to be a string. Instead of a next double, I need the next line, however long the student's name is. And now those errors are gone. Well, the errors are gone, but I'm kind of confused about all these variable names. So instead of new student, let's say new student ID, because again, this integer is going to be in ID. And now we get red lines here. So we paste. And the next thing is the student's grade. This is not a grade anymore. This is going to be the new student's name. So I'm going to call it new student name. Perfect. And last thing, we need to change these things to student ID. And then the next thing is the student's name. So we say student's name. So let's keep scrolling down. We fixed all those errors. And oh my gosh, we're getting more red. So what is this saying? Oh, okay, that's easy enough. Entry, and it's saying string double. So it's asking for an entry in this for loop. So I'm seeing that in our entry, this is a little wrong because we're doing integers and strings now. So it shouldn't be string double, it should be integer string, because integers are key and strings are value. Ooh, there we go. Now it's gone. But now we get another error. Uh-oh. Sum plus student get value. Well, this is not going to work because our value is a string. That's just not the correct thing anymore. We're not going to be summing up these students' names. That's just weird. We're not going to do that. So we're going to print out this class roster. That's what our task has to do, is correct this class roster. Well, the class roster isn't going to have any grades on it. It's going to just have IDs and it's just going to have names. So we don't even need the sum because we're not going to have an average grade. So no more sum. An average, we don't need an average. It uses sum. We don't need that. We don't need average grade. All right, let's clear that out. Now let's go ahead and build a roster. System.out.println student.getKey, which is going to be the ID. And then instead of these parentheses, which would just look different in our roster, I'm going to have the value there. The last thing is that we have a do while loop here. And so I was looking at when it's going to terminate, and it says new student ID equals double quotes. Well, I know that that's not really going to happen because it's going to always look for an int, not a string. So instead of these double quotes here, I'm going to make it stop whenever it's a -1. And that will not have my loop keep going. We shouldn't have a negative ID ever. It should always be positive numbers. So a -1 would look totally weird and therefore should be an indicator that I want to hop out of this loop. So let's run this. Student ID, I'm going to say 10. Student's name, Kyle. ID, 20. Student's name, Sarah. One more time. Student ID, 30. And then say Tony. And then in here I want to stop, so I say -1. Then nothing. So that's not what I expected because I got -1, 20, 10, 30 here, but I didn't get any of my values out. So why aren't we setting the values? Well, that's a good question, Kyle. Let's take a look. I'm going to system print out every time I loop through this what I'm actually inputting here. See if it's being input correctly. Student ID 1. So we run it and we see that we're getting back -1, 1, and 2, but no student's name. So I didn't do something right here, so I need to look around a little bit more. After looking more into it, I completely forgot to do one thing. Right here, we did this next line, read in the new line before looping back, after our double. After we try to provide some kind of numeric value, like the integer or the double, we need to read in the next line so it clears out our scanner so we can take in more input. So what I need to do is come up here and actually clear out that next line. And so we run this again. Okay, so there we go. We're getting back finally the names and those IDs, but we're still getting this -1 in test. And after more review and looking at that, coming to this if statement, I see that I still have that dot equals these quotes here. So what I need to do is replace these quotes. New student ID is a integer. So if it equals -1, like I said down here in the while loop, then I don't want it to do this if statement. I don't want it to ask for the student's name because I don't care. We don't want to even put it into our hash map. I want to exit. So there we go, -1, we run this. Perfect, class roster with those IDs and those names. Perfect, let's go back to our instructions. And that is the last part of this exercise. An awesome job, everyone. We finished this exercise. Great job sticking into the end. I hope we all got to take away some new knowledge from this.